once again, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed your lunch today. From the One King West Hotel again in downtown Toronto, welcome to the 113th season of the Empire Club of Canada. For those of you just joining us either through our webcast or our podcast, welcome to the meeting. Before our distinguished speaker is introduced today, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our head table guests. And we do have a fantastic head table here with us today. I would ask that each of the head table guests rises as I call their name. And typically at this point, we ask the audience to refrain from clapping, but we know nobody listens, so clap as much as you like as I announce the names. So first off, our speaker today, Governor Tom Ridge, former Secretary of Homeland Security, former Governor of Pennsylvania, and Chairman of Ridge Global. Mr. Sean Murphy, President of Lloyd's Canada Incorporated. Mr. Brian Reeve, Partner, Castles, Brock & Blackwell, LLP. Premier David Peterson, Chairman of Castles, Brock & Blackwell, LLP, Chancellor Emeritus, University of Toronto, and former Premier of Ontario. Mr. Bill Nugent, Regional Managing Director, North America for Kroll. Ms. Ilse Trunicht, the CEO of the Mars Discovery District and a Director at the Empire Club of Canada. Mr. Greg Markle, the President and CEO of Ridge Canada. Next, we have Mr. Peter McFarlane, Managing Director, Toronto Office Head for Kroll. Ms. Verity Sylvester, the Vice President of CMC and CO and a past president of our club. Mr. Brian Jones, Founder and Vice Chairman of Ridge Canada Cyber Solutions. And once again, my name is Paul Fogelin. In my day job, I'm the Vice President of the Ontario Retirement Communities Association, and I'm the President of the Empire Club of Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, your head table. I would also like to take the time to point out we have, I believe, two past presidents in addition to Verity with us today, Mr. Peter Hermont and Mr. Noble Chumar. So security is one of the foremost issues of our time. All across the globe and here in the West, people live their lives in some degree of fear. It's just a fact. And whether or not we agree with the degree of fear that people are living in, it is how people feel. When a Pew Research poll was conducted earlier this year in the United States, they asked 2,000 Americans to list what they believe the top international threats to security to be. Number one was ISIS, which is no surprise. But what might be surprising to you is that number two was the threat of nation-on-nation cyber terrorism. In particular, people are concerned about things like a digital raid to steal another government's information, or a large-scale attack on a nation's electrical grid. Fully 72% of Americans believe that cyber terrorism is a legitimate threat. This beats out the fear of global economic downturn, the fear of the spread of infectious diseases, and even the fear of climate change. That's significant. It is hard to know where we truly stand. Is cyber terrorism truly a great threat, or perhaps is it something that is maybe a fad, hyped up by the media? Perhaps it's something bigger than that, a more existential threat, perhaps even the greatest threat of our modern era. Fortunately, today, we're privileged to have a guest speaker with us who has some answers. A man with a wealth of experience on matters of national security and the rapid rise of digital and cyber terrorism. He's here to help us make sense of this evolving danger and to better prepare for the challenges that lie ahead, both for government and for business, and not just in the United States, but also here at home in Canada. Following the tragic events of September 11, 2001, Tom Ridge became the first assistant to the President for Homeland Security. And on January 24th of 2003, he became the first Secretary of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. During his tenure at DHS, Secretary Ridge worked with close to 200,000 employees from a combined 22 agencies to create a single agency that facilitated exemplary security for American citizens. So perhaps he is slightly to blame for lineups at airports. But folks, there's so much more to it than minor annoyances. DHS was concerned with the flow of people and goods, instituted layered security at air, land, and seaports, developed a unified national response and recovery plan, protected critical infrastructure, integrated new technology, and improved information sharing worldwide. Tom Ridge served as secretary of this historic and critical institution until February 1st of 2005. Prior to the events of September 11th, Tom Ridge was twice elected as governor of the state of Pennsylvania. He served as the state's 43rd governor from 1995 until 2001. Governor Ridge graduated from Harvard with honors. After his first year of law school at Penn State, he was drafted into the U.S. Army, where he would serve as an infantry staff sergeant in Vietnam. He earned the Bronze Star for Valor, the Combat Infantry Badge, and the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry. Once he returned to Pennsylvania, he earned his law degree and later became one of the first Vietnam combat veterans elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, where he would serve 6 terms. He is currently chairman of the United States Chamber of Commerce's National Security Task Force. He is also the co-founder of Ridge Canada. He provides clients with solutions to cybersecurity, international security, and risk management issues. Ladies and gentlemen, we are tremendously privileged to have Governor Ridge with us today. Join me in welcoming him to our podium.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, for your very gracious introduction. Thank you very much for your very warm reception. I'm burdened down by the history of the legacy of the speakers who have appeared before the Empire Club since 1903, and I will proceed, notwithstanding that you've had people like Gandhi and Winston Churchill and many other luminaries. It's a great pleasure to have the chance to really have a conversation with you about something that your president and I thought might be of interest to you and the business community and to the government as well, and that's really business and what I call the digital forevermore. A couple of initial thoughts I might. I've had a great life in public service. Will always be grateful for the opportunities to serve my country. But if you look closely at my resume, you probably say the guy can't hold a job. I've bounced around a couple. I've enjoyed and been privileged to serve in every one, from, when you think about it, from sergeant in Vietnam to a cabinet secretary. And for those of you here who have been in public service, you understand, and I understand your mentality. It is about service, so I'm privileged to have done that. I am now, however, a private citizen, and I suspect we'll have a little Q&A after all this, so and the questions may not just be on the digital part of the world, so I look forward to those Q&As, the question and answer period as well. This audience should know, and I said this earlier today, I'm not going to replicate the speech, but the first country that recognized my new position as assistant to the President for Homeland Security and actually sent an emissary to meet with me was Canada. I haven't forgotten that. I also haven't forgotten that the individual who sent to me was a man that I think Canadians admire as a political leader and as a businessman, is John Manley. John and I had the privilege of working on what we thought was a document of potential significance, a smart border accord, because we understood going in that the relationship, cultural, the commitment to democratic values, the economic relationship was very, very important, and we needed to build a smart border, and I was honored to work with him on that. I am honored to have been born in the city of the Stanley Cup champions, thank you very much, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm here to thank you for 2 great goaltenders, 6 or 7 members of the team. We got a guy on our team you may or may not know, but he's really good, Sidney Crosby. He's really good. And as I said to the audience before, on a clear day in Erie County where I live, on a beautiful summer day, I can look from an elevation and see Long Point, Canada. So I'm delighted to be with you for many, many reasons, and grateful for the invitation. I'm glad to be with my friends from Ridge, Canada. I like that. I like being associated with you guys in this country, so I appreciate that very much. The vantage point I've had in government is I try to distill to audiences what I think some of the most pressing 21st century challenges are, affect really dramatic changes in the global scene. The first is the scourge of terrorism. We're not going to talk about that, but this is a permanent condition from now on. It's a global scourge. It'll move around the countries a little bit, but we shouldn't be breathless about it. We ought to accept that, and some other time we could talk about that. The other permanent change in how the world lives and operates and functions, which is both positive and potentially negative, is what I call the digital forevermore. We are as hyper-connected, well, we're hyper-connected today, but by 2020, there'll be 50 million devices connected to the internet. Think about that for a moment. How many times do you rely on the internet during the day and you just take it for granted it's there? It's like turning on the light. And so as users, as consumers, as business leaders, as government officials, we are all connected. That's really important to note, and that's really why I wanted to focus my remarks around what I called the digital forevermore. If you take a look at the early 50s when they were beginning to build this little system, it was from our Department of Defense to multiple research universities. Fast forward to November of 2016. What an incredible digital ecosystem that we all have. But it's interesting, the basic characteristics of the internet and the system have not changed. It was designed to be an open system. That's good. It can't be secured. That's bad. The ubiquity of the internet is its strength. The ubiquity of the internet is its weakness. There's so much promise in the internet. I mean, if you're running a company, improves your efficiency, improves the supply chain, outreach and access to customers, your suppliers, profitability. It goes on. What's the peril? Well, if you have intellectual property if somebody else is interested, they might be able to access it through the internet. If you've got personal identification information of employees or customers, somebody might access it. So we've got this extraordinary ecosystem that is enormous promise. Agriculture will be improved. Healthcare will be improved. Environment can be improved. The list goes on and on and on. That's the promise. I just think that it's important for countries to pay a little bit more attention and companies to the peril of operating in the digital forevermore. The actors are well known to all of us, aren't they? I mean, China's got my dossier. I was one of the 22 million people who had all kinds of personal information at the Office of Personnel Management. It's a part of geopolitics these days as well. They got a lot of trade secrets. They got a lot of IP from some of our defense. But organized crime has a lot of personal identification information they sell. There's a dark web. They sell it. They can use it. Steal your identity, file a false tax return, do this, do that. There's all kinds of uses for that information, whether you believe it or not. So you have the hackers. Who are the hackers? Well, you got the nation states. You got organized crime. Now, the nation states, sometimes it is known and encouraged by the country. Sometimes they can't do anything about it, they're indifferent. But it's out there. And the primary culprits are China, Russia, Iran, and there's others. Because once you build that capacity inside your government, if you choose to use it to affect geopolitics, you can. We did with Stuxnet in Iran. Remember, we sped up the centrifuges, so we put the Iranian nuclear program, we slowed it down. Now, we didn't eliminate it, we slowed it down. Well, before that, Russia had used it and China has used it. So the notion that somehow countries don't use access to critical infrastructure as part of their game plan or game planning. Their war planning is wrong. Russia and China, both in published materials, talk about that dimension of war. When I was a soldier, it was air, land, and sea. Then we put somebody in space. Space became the fourth dimension of war. And 5, it's the digital space. Should we be breathless about it? No, I say don't. It's just a reality. Accept it as it is. And that's the point of the conversation I'm having with you. So we know who the actors are. What do they hope to achieve? Well, espionage, economic espionage, is a really, it's undermining and has undermined and probably put some companies out of business. You've got very strict IP. You better protect it. And when you're looking at your own enterprise, you don't have to necessarily protect the whole thing, but if you've got some crown jewels there, you better make sure you've got a series of digital things you do to protect, that IP. Of course, countries use it to spy. And espionage has been very much a part of the global community we work in. I was over in China about a year and a half ago speaking to a cybersecurity conference, which is almost an oxymoron over there. But when it was all over, I was invited to speak to the Minister of Information Security. I think that was the right title, and very respectful. We're having this wonderful conversation. And during the course of the conversation, he allowed how pleasant the dialogue was between us. And he said, well, this is a very friendly conversation. You know, friends drink tea and enemies shoot at one another. I said, well, Minister, I've done both. Then we proceeded along the conversation, and I got this straight-faced, inscrutable look talking about all the false accusations that we're spying on you in America. I said respectfully to the minister, we teach the history of one of your great military strategists, Sun Tzu, at our service academies. And Sun Tzu said, millennium ago, he said, it's the enlightened ruler and the brilliant general that gets as much information as they can to secure advantage on the battlefield. So while we're having a conversation about cybersecurity, let's just admit this. We're looking over your digital shoulder, you're looking over our digital shoulder, and let's talk about some other things, which we did. But so we shouldn't be so naive to think that countries aren't doing it all the time to each other, and we are. And frankly, the fact that we used it as an attempt to affect policy vis-a-vis Iran, it's not like America had done it first because Russia and others have been doing it, but it's part of the game we play. So you've got espionage, you've got theft, you've got disruption. So we know who the actors are, we know what the threats are. So what do we do when we come to the business community, and why do I say that it's imperative that the mindset, and this is not just Canadian business, I've said it to American businesses and business elsewhere, there's an old mindset, an old attitude towards cybersecurity. One, understand that you're vulnerable internally, not malfeasance by one of your employees. It just may be gross negligence. A couple years ago, a company did a survey and found one of the groups most susceptible to the phishing are the CEOs and the executives in the companies. So you've got that internal threat. But since you're connected to your suppliers and your customer base and everything else, you have third-party threats in. So be mindful of that. And understand if you have information of value inside your operation and your enterprise, it may be of value to somebody else, and you better think about how you're going to protect it. So I think the mentality used to be, I'm the CEO, I got a chief information security officer, I have a chief technology officer, I'm going to let him or her take care of it. The new paradigm says, Mr. President, Mr. Board of Directors, ultimately, you're going to be accountable. If you're publicly traded, you got shareholders, you got employees, you got people in the neighborhood, you got suppliers. It used to be, we'll take care of it if something happens. We're in a reactive mode. If it happens, we'll figure out how to do it. No, I think you better be in the preemptive mode, and you better lay out a strategy, a broader strategy. You might need some consulting. You may need monitoring. You need far more than firewalls. They're a thing of the past. They may be a part of the strategy. You may want to be able to, you probably think about getting some kind of vulnerability assessment, some kind of cyber insurance. You better be prepared, particularly to accept the notion if something occurs in Canada and the United States, you're going to have to talk to regulators, you're going to have to talk to the media, you may have to talk to your shareholders, you may have to talk to your investors. So all this, you better have at the ready and pray you never need it. So you got to change that mindset from, we'll wait till it happens and figure it out, to it will happen, and when it does, this is what we're going to do. And it's got to be an enterprise-wide effort. A couple final thoughts, and then I'm sure you're much more interested in asking questions. In the 20th century, in Canada and the United States, Charles Deming came up with something called total quality management. It was an attitude toward how you run your business. It was the governance group, the management, it was the employees, it was supply chain, everybody that interacted within that enterprise had to take on that notion that every step on the way we have to think about quality performance in order to have a quality service or a quality product. Because if there's a defect anyway along the way, we're not going to achieve what we want, and that's increased sales and a solid reputation in the marketplace. I think the new mindset in the 21st century ought to take that mindset and start thinking about resiliency. Resiliency inside the enterprise. Be as ready as you can. Understand the risks. Be as ready as you can, but if something happens, you also have to be able to recover quickly and continue to do business. Here's an interesting area where I think the government and the private sector can cooperate. Just like getting information on a battlefield, if you're engaged in digital conflict, you would be best served, governments and companies would be best served if they exchanged information about breaches, the nature of the breaches, precursors to breaches, code and malware. They just would. Finally last year in the States, we convinced the Congress, and President Obama signed it, to create a legal safe harbor for all the lawyers in the room, understandably concerned about private business telling the government not only they've been breached, the nature of the breach, worried about the regulatory hammer coming down on them. But we created a safe harbor so you can share that information. We're going to encourage you to share it. We're going to encourage the executive branch, pursuant to President Obama's executive order, to share that information down to the private sector. That's a collaboration. And I say to the private sector, and I say this respectfully, thinking of your government and mine, governments move at glacial-like speed. Actually, there's probably glaciers that move faster. And when it comes to technology changes, hackers move faster than government. Technology changes quicker than government. So never expect the government can be smart enough to be prescriptive enough to tell you everything to do at all time in order to reduce your risk of a cyber attack, because it can't. It's really not its function. Where government can help is help you build standards, share information, but you're really on your own. And that's why I think if you're thinking of 21st century digital risk in this extraordinarily powerful ecosystem, you better think about what the risk is, how it relates to you, what's the technology you have, are you doing vulnerability assessments, are you monitoring, are you prepared for some economic loss with cyber insurance, do you have a response and recovery? That's what you need to do. I think the companies that are prepared to do that in time will not only survive, they'll flourish. The last comment I share with you is related to that. I was necessarily a very good science student. That's probably why I ended up in the infantry. They would never put me in the Corps of Engineers. But the one thing I remember about reading The Origin of Species and Darwin, and he talked about the survival of the fittest, I think it's been misinterpreted over the years. If you read it, he didn't really say that it's the strongest, the biggest, and the fastest that survives. He said it's the species that adapts to change that survives. Well, I think business has to be a lot more Darwinian if you're going to succeed in the digital world. You have to adapt to that change. You may not like it, but it exists. You don't have to be breathless about it because you can manage that risk. It can be managed. It is a business risk. So if you bring that mentality to the digital risk, like you bring it to supply chain risk, like you may bring the currency exchange risk, if you just bring that same mentality and you build resiliency in your enterprise, I think you're going to be fine. I think you're going to be fine. And that's what I think the message should be. Accept the reality as it is and just simply manage the risk. before it manages you. Businesses do it all the time. Just bring the same mindset to the risk of a digital attack as you do to all other potential risk, and you'll flourish. Hopefully do more than survive, be the profitable enterprise that you want to be. So I think that concludes my remarks. I appreciate you not nodding to sleep during the course of time. It was a great lunch. Love the dessert. There are no calories in the dessert, ladies. I tried it. It's really good. And happy to have any Q&A that you want. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Governor. As the Governor mentioned, he is gracious enough to be taking questions, and not just on cybersecurity issues. He's willing to take any question you might have. So I'm going to take the opportunity to bridge the gap and ask the first question, Governor. We had this election last week, the small elections that people may have heard of.
Somehow I knew that would come up.
I'm interested in your perspective, as best as you can surmise. In a President Trump administration, fast forward 2, 3, 4 years, is the United States safer from cyber terrorism, or are they more at risk?
I think there is a growing awareness within our business community of many of the elements that I talked to you about the need to understand their vulnerabilities, manage the risk, identify those critical pieces of their intellectual property and network and system that needs to be protected, layering multiple defenses. The risk for cyber insurance is getting better, being able to build a response and recovery. So I think there's momentum notwithstanding government. Like I said before, if business waits on government to help them eliminate the risk, it'll get there. It's slow. It's just not going to work that very effectively. What has happened is President Obama, in 2013, signed an executive order that said 3 things. One, we're going to have the National Institute of Standards and Technology work for almost a year with our private businesses. We're going to try to build a blueprint, an operational blueprint, to help them come up with basically a program, how you identify the risk, how you manage that risk, and how you prepare to build that redundancy, that resiliency in the system. The second thing the executive order did was say to the federal government, you federal agencies ought to be sharing information down either to those critical infrastructures. This is around critical infrastructure protection, energy, telecom, banking, the kind of enterprises that private companies own, but the government of Canada or the government of the United States needs in order to operate and to function. So he said we need more information sharing, and it was an initiative to encourage that. And the third thing that is really precious to me and to you, to Canada and the U.S., it also put an oversight board on to make sure that as we go down that path that we don't infringe on the privacy and civil liberties of our country. And I think that's really important. None of us realize, you probably have no idea how much Google knows about you. I mean, you have no idea how much private sector knows about you. One example, it's a long-winded answer. I gave a commencement speech at a law school a couple years ago, and a gift that I received from one of the graduates were 4 fascinating books. I loved them. But you know what? I didn't pick them out. I filled out a form with basic information about me and generic likes and dislikes. And every quarter for a year, I got a new novel. If I'd have gone through Barnes & Noble or a bookstore, I would not have selected those books. They were terrific. Broken was one of them. I don't know if you read the Broken. So I'm saying there's a lot of information out there about you. So if you take that information that the private sector has, and if you ever put it in the hands of government, and you put it together, it's a treasure trove of only a dark imagination can take you down the wrong street. And so I think the fact that democracies, while we want to balance security, we have to balance it against privacy, and that requires vigilance of you and me and everybody else privileged to live in a democratic country.
All right, audience members, the Governor will take your questions. Please, if you do have one, wait for the microphone to be brought to you. We have one up here, Taylor.
Governor Ridge, thank you for coming. My name is Stuart Tate. Fascinating. I was reading your bio before I came to refresh what you've accomplished in your life, and I just wanted to go back to bed and pout for a while because I'm far, far from that. So with the U.S. election that just happened, so with the election and allegations that Russia was influencing, you have Assange, you have Snowden. Are guys like Assange and Snowden criminals? Are they canaries in the coal mine warning us of dangers ahead? And if Russia's not punished for what they've done or alleged to have done, what's to stop China or Iran in 4 years' time to influence an election again in the United States of America? And there has to be, I would think, a dire penalty to those countries economically, or because it's almost like it's constant warfare now from what you're saying, that fifth dimension. So there has to be casualties in that battle. And how are these countries deterred from doing this again?
So just to repeat the question for those who may not have heard, the first, I believe, was a question about Julian Assange and Edward Snowden. Do you consider them criminals? Was that the question?
Yeah, the answer is yes. No amnesty, they are. Next question.
Okay, that was easy. The other one was about what Russia may or may not have done during the election. If they're not, the tampering, that is, and the hacking, if they're not punished, does it send the wrong message to China and other countries?
First of all, you have no idea the damage that Snowden did to my country. Just believe it or not, no pardon. If he wants to live in Russia for the rest of his life, I'm perfectly content. May he live there forever. Very good question. Very good question. Let's talk about physical warfare and cyber warfare, because they're able and have done both. One of the challenges confronting a nation state that engages in cyber warfare, we have the technology technically that can make them, we can attribute the attack to them, but how do you hold them accountable unless you do the same thing? Now, I suspect that we have offensive capabilities, and I'm not going to project what we may be doing privately that's not necessarily out for the world to see. I remember when the North Korea tacked into Sony. If I'd have been president, I would have loved to have my tech people come in and say, here's what we got to do. They tacked into Sony, who cares? It was a stupid movie anyhow, in my point of view. But they tacked into an American company. When the leader opens up his laptop and he clicks it, what I want you to have him see the first thing is the American flag waving and the Star-Spangled Banner behind him. Let him know, we know who you are, we know where you are, we know how you get to you, so knock it off. The physical side is much more difficult. I don't know where this administration is going to go with Russia, but I'm going to give you Tom Ridge's impression of Putin and Russia, and I don't pretend to be a foreign policy expert, but I did just come back from a week in Ukraine. They got a war going on over there. They're not just in Crimea, they're up in the eastern section of Ukraine. They've got separatists. They've literally built World War I trenches in part of their place to build part of their defensive system. So here's what's going on when I take a look at Russia. First time a country has invaded another country, a sovereign, since World War II, and NATO and the U.S. condemned it. I just don't think that's made much of an impression. We had the opportunity, congressionally authorized, $500 million worth of lethal weapons to Russia. President Obama didn't sign. I mean, it's there, the law exists, but we haven't sent it to him. By the way, they said, we don't want your soldiers. Just send us the weapons, we'll defend ourselves. So you got that going on in Ukraine. You saw how they were playing around a little bit in our election, tapping in the Democrats. By the way, we work with a company that Republican National Committee had on its website. There was one party that was hacked, and there was one party that wasn't hacked. So if you're worried about that, give me a call. I'll put you into space with this company. Another story. Look what he's doing in Syria. So if you look at Ukraine and Syria, he's really exacerbated the tensions and the problems, and yet he finds himself masterfully inside trying to negotiate a settlement to problems he's created. I'll bet, it'll be private, but his intelligence community, he'll be playing around in the German and the French elections next year, a little disruption, a little chaos. So I think we need to accept who he is. He's a wily, capable, a strategist of evil. I mean, I don't know how you could possibly trust this guy. He runs a very repressive government. And I'm not saying you got to go to, we're not talking about military action, but we're talking about the Western world standing up to blatant aggression, and we haven't done it. Madeleine Albright, former Secretary of State, wrote a beautiful book about her when she was from birth to like 11 or 12 years old. But during the period when Russians were saying, we got to go into Czechoslovakia because they're intimidating and repressing German-speaking people. And Neville Chamberlain said, well, we don't want to get into war, we don't want to do this, and he let them have Czechoslovakia. But you listen to Putin in Crimea, we got to go in Crimea, we were there before, they're Russian-speaking people and they're being oppressed, which they weren't, by the way. So I think the world has to move, understand he's a leader of a sovereign country, you have to understand where he's coming from, and I think you have to be very cautious before you, with caveat emptor, sorry for the long-winded answer. I think we just have to be very careful. His intentions, I think you can derive what he's trying to do by some of these very strategic acts that he's taken in different parts of the world. Remember, he said the worst thing that ever happened to his country was the breakup of the Soviet Union. If he can put it back together bit by bit, he tried to do it. And if he can do it peacefully, with people ignoring his modest aggression. If you live in Crimea, they've lost like 1.5 million people have left Crimea. By the way, to credit the Ukrainian government, they didn't need a government program. They've all been repatriated among their fellow countrymen. Pretty remarkable if you think about it. So I think you got to be careful. And I think there's the president-elect's relationship with Putin. I don't know what it's going to be, and I'm not going to prejudge it. I just think he has to proceed carefully. Sorry for the long-winded answer, but it's about global engagement and global leadership and global response to aggression. And I just think you let aggressors keep moving. They'll move until you stop them. And I'm not saying you need military, but squeeze those sanctions. It might be even a bit stronger message. Right, question.
Governor, I believe we have time for one more question.
Thank you for being here. My name is Carolyn Cole. Do you anticipate in the near future financial institutions to require businesses who may be at risk of cyber breaches as part of their term sheets before they advance loans?
So I'm going to restate it. I believe the question was, do you believe financial institutions will be required in the future who, if there's a threat of cybersecurity, required to disclose before loans or insurance? Before they get insurance for loans? Very good question.
I think they ought to be required to buy it from Ridge Canada, but that's another story. I think it's a really good question. And let me just tell you what's going on in the States. The regulators have taken a very aggressive attitude toward companies that they've concluded they may have been breached. There have been no information exfiltrated. They're fining them significantly. The state of New York has some very extensive regulations overseeing the financial institutions in the state, those under the state regulatory agency, requiring audits and the like. I think it's conceivable in the foreseeable future, I'm only going to talk about my own country, given the way the SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission, is moving, given the way some of the state regulators are moving, they may require digital audits, which I find, again, it's government means well, but a digital audit's not like a financial. You could get a clean digital audit today and be in the soup tomorrow. You could get a clean fiscal audit today, but it may take you a couple of quarters in order to get back in the soup. So I think there's a trend toward more oversight, and whether it is reduced, it goes down to a mandate down the road, I don't know, but I'm very wary of it. And that's why I say government's going to be punitive. They're going to act after the fact. And the focus should be on the front end. Understand the risk, prepare for the risk, insure against the risk, monitor your website. That's where government should be, frankly, providing more incentives and more encouragement than just regulatory penalties.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our Q&A session. Let's give another warm round of applause for Governor Rick.
Thank you. My pleasure.
I would like to welcome at this time Mr. Sean Murphy to the podium to give the formal thanks to our esteemed speaker.
Governor Ridge, first and foremost, I'd like to express on behalf of the people here in attendance and myself our thanks for your insightful remarks. This has been my third opportunity to hear you speak, and each one of them have been extremely captivating. There's no doubt that the nature of risk is ever-changing. We must identify those risks in our respective firms to protect and defend against them. In terms of cyber, the risk gets greater each day. And your comments of the past that the digital sun isn't going to set, it's just going to get hotter, continues to resonate in my mind. I know you're excited about your new venture in Canada. I'm confident that Ridge Canada will support companies in their efforts to prepare, protect in today's ever-changing cyber landscape. Thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts with us, and I wish you continued success.
A sincere thank you once again to our two event sponsors, Kroll and Lloyd's Canada, for making this event possible. We just simply couldn't host these lunches without the support of our generous sponsors. So thank you once again. I would also like to thank the National Post, our official print media sponsor, and Rogers TV, who is our local broadcaster. I'd also like to thank MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online space for live webcasting today's broadcast to thousands of people worldwide. And although our club has been around since 1903, we have moved into the 21st century, and we are active on social media. So please do follow us on Twitter at empire_club, and visit us online at our website, empireclub.org. We also have a Facebook, LinkedIn page as well. Finally, please join us again. Our next speaker at the club is the Honourable Glenn Thibeault, the Minister of Energy for Ontario, and he's with us on November the 28th. Thank you so much for attending. This meeting is now adjourned. Enjoy the rest of your day.